In March of 2025, Voice of America suddenly fell silent after an executive order was signed dismantling the U.S.'s international broadcasting network, which relies entirely on federal funding.
I mean, when journalism is under attack, everyone's under attack, and I don't think Americans realize that.
I think there's also this perception that, like, the new media can take over and the podcasters will cover it. Very hard to get from them. But it's interesting.
Patsy, Kate, and Jessica were among more than 1,000 employees placed on administrative leave overnight, a shock that pushed them to sue the government over what they describe as political interference. After a year of waiting, a judge ruled in their favor, ordering broadcasts to resume and journalists to be gradually reinstated.
I hope a lot more of our colleagues will be brought back. Congress has made it pretty clear that that's what they expect. The judge has made it very clear that that's what he expects. VOA is in 5 languages right now. It was in 49 before. There's plenty of funding to do a whole lot more. So get everybody back to work.
We have lost the trust of our audience because we had 360 million people every week who rely on us for information, and then suddenly we were gone. And now we're starting to come back, but we see that the journalism that is broadcast on VOA reflects primarily the point of view of the administration. So that's also another erosion of trust. We're not mandated to be propaganda. It's not over yet. There's still going to be a long, long road ahead.
Since returning to power, Donald Trump has made no secret of his intention to bring the media into line. Jessica Jarrett, who has covered press freedom for the past 10 years, says these tactics resemble those used by authoritarian regimes.
I was watching in the last sort of few months leading up to when VOA closed of how those tactics were playing out in the US as well, and how there was more pressure on the media, and always public media, and it's always the same argument, right? That they're biased, that these are people that shouldn't be trusted. This whole concept that journalism is somehow lying to you becomes a very popular narrative for governments, because if you can make the audience or your constituents distrust what they're hearing, it's much easier to hide some of the more problematic policies that you're trying to put through.
At the White House, the administration has now opened the press briefing room to conservative influencers. And at the Pentagon, new rules governing journalists' work were introduced, prompting many reporters to refuse them. Among them was Tom Bowman, a longtime correspondent for public radio network NPR.
They basically asked us to sign this directive. And the directive said we can't solicit information from anyone at the Pentagon. You know, we have to wait until they release some information, then we can report on it. Basically, they would turn us into stenographers and not reporters. So 60 or 70 of us declined to sign that. And we turned our badges in and we walked out of the Pentagon.
For the first time in 28 years, Tom's office is now in the newsroom and not at the Department of Defense.
Hey, Mark, it's Tom Bowman with NPR. Hope all is well. Just calling about what's going on with Ukraine and negotiations, and see if there's an update. Give me a call when you can.
The reporter has had to adapt the way he works, now relying more on embassies and members of Congress for information as military officials have grown more cautious.
I miss the fact that we would see admirals and generals coming in from all around the world, and we could just chat them up in the hallway about what's going on. So we've lost all of that. And the benefit for both reporters and the military, a lot of times we would go up to a senior officer and say, hey, I'm working on this story. I think it's going this way. And oftentimes they would give us direction, say, Tom, that's not really where the story's going. The story's kind of going over in this direction. I still talk with people in the Pentagon, but a lot of them don't want to talk because they're afraid that they'll upset President Trump or Defense Secretary Hegseth.
More recently, Donald Trump criticized media coverage of the war in Iran, calling it hostile to the administration. And the head of the Federal Communications Commission has raised the possibility of sanctions against certain networks, an unusual stance for an independent agency. And it is in this climate that a new generation of journalists is preparing to enter an industry undergoing deep changes.
There's always been tension between the press and the politicians who cover them. There's something much different now than there used to be. And that is an outright effort to discredit journalists in democratic society.
These first-year students at American University in Washington are learning the basics of interviewing. Their professor warns them about how journalism is viewed today.
So that's what you're going to do today. Why would it be meaningful to you to consider the president calling the press enemy of the people? How might it affect you trying to do a story about politics or about the Epstein files?
People want to talk to you and tell you what they actually think, because they either want to be extra energy or they don't want to be caught up in your work.
But for a regular citizen,
Another concern for these students is the recent layoffs at the Washington Post. The iconic paper, now owned by billionaire Jeff Bezos, fired more than 300 people in early February.
This one is the on the meeting. If the Post is doing this, well, then how quickly are other news outlets going to follow, and how drastic is this shift going to be? That worries me a lot, and it just kind of is not very encouraging to want to go into a field like that where all this is happening.
The growing concentration of media ownership in the hands of billionaires is raising new questions about newsroom independence. Reporters Without Borders says the U.S. is now ranked 57th in the Press Freedom Index, falling 12 spots in just 2 years.